Okay, we're going to have a little look at our prep work first of all. Now, what I have here is one of my exterior panels. And you can see it's quite big. And I've already fused a woven fusible interfacing to the back of it. And I'm going to do this exactly the same with both of the exterior panels. So I'll have two exterior panels. I'm only showing you one. And the two lining panels, which are almost exactly the same shape, but they're just slightly narrower at the bottom and the sides here, which will allow for you to have a perfectly fitted lining. There is nothing that annoys me more than a really baggy lining. So your lining panels are not exactly the same shape as your exterior panels, and there's a reason for that. So you have two options really. Now this is quite a big bag, and you could, if you wanted to, use foam as a stabilizer, but for those of you who are newer bag makers, I'm just giving this a bit of a press because I can see little wrinkles where I clearly haven't pressed it very well. If you're a newer bag maker, I would say can use the fusible fleece, simply because it will make it a lot easier to sew. If you're a more experienced bag maker, then by all means use foam. I won't be giving any instructions in the videos for using foam, but you know how to use foam if you're an experienced bag maker. Cut it to the same size as your exterior, sew baste it on around the outsides, and when you start to stitch the bag together at the seams, you can take out your basting stitch and trim out the foam from the seam allowances. This works equally as well as a foam stabilised bag as it does as a fusible fleece stabilised bag. So I'm going to turn my exterior panel over, and I'm going to take my piece of fusible fleece, and your fusible fleece should be approximately 3/8 of an inch smaller than your main piece, so there'll be a little bit of the fabric showing around the outside, and I'm just going to place it where it needs to be so that I've got a sort of an equal amount showing around the outside. It's quite a big panel, so it doesn't actually fit on my screen terribly well. And then I'm going to get hold of the fleece and the exterior panel and turn it over so that those pieces all stay together. And take my iron, and I'm not pressing, I'm not pushing down on this. All I'm doing is running my iron over, starting in the middle and working out towards the edges. And all we need to do is heat the fusible fleece enough for the glue to melt. Now you can use low loft or high loft fusible fleece on this. It really won't make a lot of difference. This is one that I got from, I think the lady's called Jill Barzag. And it's a lot cheaper than the branded stuff. It's a lower loft fusible fleece, but it's quite it makes quite a lot of, gives it quite a lot of structure, and I quite like it. It's probably about £4 a metre, and you can find her in a lot of the de-stash groups and the sort of fabrics for bag making groups and what have you on Facebook. But you can use the Vilene products if you've got them, or there's lots of generic ones out there. So just run your iron over the back and forth across the panel, not pushing down. I think you can see I'm not actually pushing down at all. I'm just kind of running the warm iron over. Now this iron is cordless, so it does get cool quite quickly, so I may have to put it back on the stand to warm up, and that's fine. But you're going to do this with both of your exterior panels, not the lining panels. Now if you think you might like to do the outside of this in a faux leather or in a waterproof canvas, you could actually attach the fleece to the lining panels. Faux leather, you could probably get away without having any stabilizer, but I do think that a little bit it gives it a bit of something. So I'm just going to turn that over and see if it's attached around. It's around the edges that you find that it doesn't. So if you just kind of push it with your fingernail, let's see, now there's a bit there that's just not adhered. Soften up at the very edges, and you can just, yeah, another bit there on that corner that hasn't adhered. So I'm just going to turn it back over, take my iron and just go over those edges again, just to make sure that all of the corners have actually stuck. All you're doing is melting the glue. You're not compressing the fleece, so you're not pushing down at all. This isn't ironing or pressing. This is just warming. Now, all fusible fleeces have different instructions. I never use steam with any of mine, even if they say to, because I use a wool pressing mat, and if you use steam, the wool pressing mat absorbs the moisture and smells like a dead sheep, and that's not a smell that anybody wants to have to put up with. So I never use steam with mine. If your fusible fleece says to use steam, then use steam, or spray bottle on your ironing board. But if you're using a pressing mat, a wool pressing mat, I wouldn't advise using any water at all, because you will end up with, say, a farmyard smell, which is really not very pleasant. So you're going to do that for both of your exterior panels. Now, if you're going to use foam, as I say, you can cut your foam to the same size as your exterior panel and sew baste it. I wouldn't sew baste into the little V's. I would only sew baste around the bottom, the sides, and perhaps on that curve. I probably wouldn't bother with these two little top bits either. And sew baste at 1/8 of an inch. If you're sew basting, my favourite tip is to sew baste using a different colour thread, a brightly coloured thread. So if you've got some threads that you've perhaps, I don't know, bought in error, some really bright colours that you're never going to use, put that through your machine so your basting is in a very different bright colour. Then you can tell the difference between your basting stitches and your construction stitches. But sew baste it at 1/8 of an inch just around the outsides, and then when we start to construct, you just take the basting stitches out, trim out the foam from the seam allowance, which is quite doable. But if you're a new bag maker, using foam can be quite daunting and quite intimidating, and actually fusible fleece is okay for this bag. It's a fairly soft and slouchy bag. Doesn't need to be major structured. I have to say I'm a fan of a structured bag, so I may well make one with some foam just to see how it goes. But you could use foam for this. It's big enough to use foam, and you'll still be able to turn it with foam. So you're going to do this with both of your outside pieces. Your lining pieces, which are a very similar shape, you're just going to use the woven fusible interfacing. So that'd be that G700 or one of the generic versions. Ideally, you would use a woven fusible interfacing, because if you use a non-woven fusible interfacing, you're likely to get wrinkles, and it gets a slightly papery feel to it, which is really not pleasant, and the overall finish tends to look a bit scrappy, especially on the outside, because it will look a bit wrinkled. Now, why do we use woven fusible interfacing underneath our fusible fleece? Fusible fleece is notorious for wrinkling when you put it on. It also often will shrink the fabric. However, if you use a woven fusible interfacing to stabilize your fabric before you put the fusible fleece on, I find it doesn't wrinkle. Once you've done all that pressing, leave your panel flat and wait till it cools. You can, I mean, because I've used a wool pressing mat, I can still put my hand on there and feel the heat coming out of it. So you need to leave it nice and flat. If you don't, it will crease and pucker. So leave it flat until it's cool. Half an hour, go and get a cup of tea and a cake, make a few phone calls, have a little surf on the interweb and see what else you can buy. But that's your basic interfacing of your main panels. All of the other panels, and that includes all of the pocket linings and what have you, are all interfaced with a woven fusible interfacing. The only piece that isn't interfaced is the zipper pocket overlay that will go on the front, or indeed on the back of your bag, depends what you want it, where you want it to be. That won't be interfaced. I don't interface any faux leather. The only time I'd ever interface faux leather is if I was making a whole bag with it and it was a stretchy kind of faux leather, and then I might put a woven fusible interfacing on it just to make it easier to stitch. So that's your prep work. Very, very simple. Woven fusible interfacing on all pieces, and either fusible fleece, or if you prefer foam, on the outside pieces only. So the front and the back, two pieces this shape, and it's a big old shape, with either woven fusible interfacing and either fusible fleece or foam if you prefer. I will make a sample with foam just to show you the difference, but obviously I haven't done that yet, so I can't show you now, but I'll show you when we put these videos out.